One of the great things about the Bleeper approach is that we take what was a 30-minute outpatient appointment into basically a 5 to 6 minute review by a specialist. And that means that a typical consultant can do 5 to 6 times the number of cases. And that's how you'll start to see the backlog reduced by adopting Bleeper in the pathways.
Hello, you're watching Proactive. I'm joined by Feedback CEO, Dr. Tom Oakley. Tom, very good to speak with you this morning. Could you provide any more detail on the developments of route to market, both in the UK and India?
Hi, Stephen. Really good to see you. Thanks for having me on. It's been a really exciting time for us. We've been working on a product for a number of years now, and I think we've really got to the point where we've honed the value proposition, both in the UK market, but also in some of our international opportunities, such as in India. And I think our route to market has both traditionally been very direct, where we've gone out to sell the product straight into particularly the NHS customer here in the UK. But now we're increasingly looking at how we can go to market with partners. And during the period, we actually signed a partnership arrangement with one of the UK's leading primary care record providers, which is absolutely fundamental to driving patient volumes through the pathways that we deliver. So all these pathways start with the patient in primary care, and then those referrals come through now seamlessly into our platform. And this partnership enables us not only to enhance our ability to sell because we can co-sell with that partner, but it also just means that from a scalability perspective, our technology is natively embedded into the primary care space, and therefore we can scale very rapidly, both at a regional and even potentially to national level. So it's laying all the foundation blocks for us getting ever larger contracts, which is key to the sort of strategy of the company to go for these ever larger block contracts with regions and potentially even national bodies.
Tom, what are the main obstacles to commercialization?
So the main obstacles really are around the decision-making process, particularly within public sector bodies, and then, of course, funding within public sector bodies. I think it's no secret that healthcare globally is a very difficult space to operate within, and within the UK with the NHS, it's particularly challenging and has been particularly challenging of late. Under the last administration, we had a sort of rotating door of Secretary of State, which meant the decision-making process was quite challenging. However, now we have a new administration, a brand new government, who are very focused and very clear what their priorities are, and they align beautifully to our product and what we're trying to do. And so actually a lot of those barriers are starting to move out of the way. So where Streeting's priorities are all about moving from acute providers into the community space, moving from analog to digital, and from moving from sickness to prevention. And those are all three are areas that Bleeper addresses. Our primary purpose is to provide that connection between primary care and secondary care around pathways. That allows us to deliver care in the community, closer to the GP and closer to the patient. We're all, of course, about moving from paper-based systems to digital, because that's our core product with Bleeper. And then also by treating patients earlier, we're actually able to get them before they become too sick. So it's aligning beautifully to that NHS position. We're together with our primary care record provider. We have been developing a combined product offering around neighbourhood healthcare delivery called the Neighbourhood Health Record. And that actually aligns to the neighbourhood health service model that West Streeting is calling for. We also, during the period, unlocked a direct funding mechanism for Bleeper through the Elective Recovery Fund. This is the first time we've actually had a dedicated funding mechanism for what we do. And one of the biggest challenges is to unlock funding. We actually have had a little bit of uncertainty around whether that will continue beyond March, and that has delayed some of the decisions and the contracting decisions with the numerous NHS partners that are interested in what we're looking at. However, we do have now some visibility that funding is going to continue next year. Currently, the NHS is going through what they call planning guidance, where they issue guidance around next year's funding settlement to the system. That goes then through a consultation period, which finishes on the 28th of February. Once that's all done, we should know by mid-March exactly what the picture looks like for next year. And that should allow us to then close down some of the contract opportunities we have with various NHS partners around that neighbourhood model and those new pathways. So we're kind of just watching this space for the minute, but we're very, very close. And based on the intelligence we have, we feel pretty confident that the elective recovery mechanism is going to continue beyond March. We just need the granular detail around what that looks like now.
Are you seeing any visibility re government initiatives? Has the landscape changed significantly post the election?
Yeah, but I think the landscape is completely transformed. There is now very clear alignment. In fact, actually, right from Downing Street down, it's one of Keir Starmer's 6 pillars is reducing elective care backlog. Now, one of the key outputs of Bleeper, of course, is that we can reduce wait times by as much as 63%, and we can divert about 90% of patients away from hospital. And all of that is because we're able to hold all of that information for the patient and present it to clinicians remotely so that they don't need to see the patient in person. Now, actually, that links very neatly back into what we were saying about Wes's 3 priorities, the acute to community, the disease to prevention, and then analog to digital. And we are actually seeing them making personnel changes at various stages. So there is going to be a new chief executive of NHS England, which I think it will be a real change to the central decision-making capability. We're also seeing increased powers going to the integrated care boards, who are our target customer group, which makes it much easier for us then actually to get these contracts because they're actually the decision makers. And then actually, as of yesterday, the 24th of February, the new procurement legislation came in for public procurement, so the Procurement Act 2023, and this is hugely advantageous to startups and SMEs because it allows us to be much more dynamic about the procurement approach, and I think it will actually open a number of doors for us. So yes, we are seeing some real meaningful and tangible changes that should make things much easier for us.
Can you provide more detail on the elective recovery fund eligibility, Tom? How's the partnership with Moorhouse progressing?
Yeah, so the elective recovery funding is our key mechanism for actually driving the adoption of Bleeper, particularly as it relates to pathways. And essentially, for every time we divert a patient away from an outpatient appointment, we are eligible for a £206 payment that goes to the integrated care board partner. And that money is then used to pay both the licensing costs for our service, also the implementation and change management of our partners Moorhouse, and then also the hospital provider who actually delivers that service to the GP and to the patient. And it's an activity-based payment, so the more that we do, the more that we get paid. However, we do understand that as of post-March, that will be capped at an ICB level, and therefore the activity is going to have to be pre-agreed with them, because if they do more than what they've agreed, there won't be additional funding on top. So for the first time, that funding mechanism is capped. And what that means is that we are doing a lot of work at the minute with ICBs now to work with them to model how many patients we think they can get through, and therefore how much funding they should be applying for upfront. With the slight risk that if that delivery isn't, if that activity isn't delivered, some of that money will get clawed back, but that's not a bad position and it's not unusual for the system. So we're saying be ambitious, go out for large numbers because we know we can get you there. One of the great things about the Bleeper approach is that we take what was a 30-minute outpatient appointment into basically a 5 to 6 minute review by a specialist. And that means that a typical consultant can do 5 to 6 times the number of cases. And that's how you'll start to see the backlog reduced by adopting Bleeper and the pathways. So it's all about activity, driving volume through, and then getting the ICBs to be paid through that mechanism.
Tom, how could potential changes to the ERF being included in ICP funding rather than ring-fenced impact the company?
So, as I said, I think the intelligence tells us very much that ERF is going to be available post-March. We've seen it in the planning guidance that's already landed in the system. That's going through consultation at the minute, and then full technical guidance will come out in March. Until that point, we won't know for certain. But the advice and guidance approach that we deliver, the straight-to-diagnostic test route that we deliver, is mentioned throughout the planning guidance documents. They have also indicated that they're going to create a funding mechanism for GPs. They're going to pay GPs £20 every time they engage in advice and guidance, which also indicates that they're certainly thinking about continuing what we do, and therefore I'd be very surprised if ERF is not there. However, ERF is not our only route. We still have the direct sales approach, which is basically using capital available in the system to pay for licenses on a block contract, which was the traditional way in which we sold the product. And we do know that there is year-end capital increasingly becoming available, and so we are looking at potentially using that in some areas. And then lastly, there are new payment mechanisms coming through as part of the procurement changes that I mentioned around the new Procurement Act. There are things like dedicated tariff for what we do, and that would be scalable and fully ring-fenced. So we want ERF to continue because that's a surefire thing for us. In the event that it doesn't, we do have other options. We're actively pursuing other options as well, because you never back one horse in this race. But we're pretty confident in the position that it's going to be available next year, and therefore we should be well positioned post-March to get those contracts signed with the ICB partners.
Just finally, Tom, can you tell us how your various pilots are progressing?
Yeah, so the pilots are doing really very well, both on the NHS side, but then also in India. So we have a number of pilots going with the community diagnostic centres. We have one in Manchester, we have one in Buckinghamshire, and then we also have a sort of prolonged programme in Sussex with Queen Victoria Hospital around looking at various models of care, various different pathways. So we started with the breathlessness pathway. That then went for a formal contract during the period that we've just reported. But then we are looking at piloting other pathways, such as a non-site-specific abdominal pathway, potentially urology pathways and ENT pathways, so building out the value proposition into different clinical areas. And then in India, we're making great progress with our NGO partner, HEAL Foundation. In fact, we've done almost 2,000 TB screenings since the beginning of this year with that partner, and that's really building some momentum and interest for the product in India, which should lead to more contract conversations in the relatively near term, and we will keep everyone updated as that progresses. So yes, all looking very good on those fronts.
Tom, I hope you will keep us updated on any progress with that. Thank you very much for speaking with us today.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Tom Oakley, Feedback CEO.